once I had one, and I woke up the next day, I thought, oh man, the guilt came in. I said, what did I do? I can't believe I did it. I can't tell anybody. This will never happen again. This was insanity. And do you know, maybe it lasted about a week or two, and the thought kept on back. Oh, you got some money. Why don't you go back in again? No. And I'd fight it back and forth, back and forth. If there was ever a low to my life, it was that. Living these two lives, one of Mr. Clean, drug counselor, give you the advice, and at the same time, Mr. hanging out in abandonmenium shooting dope. It ruined it. I mean, I was like, it took a long time to heal from that kind of nonsense that I put myself through.
So that's the edge of the volcano right there. Here we are for Dancing on a Volcano, episode 4 with Rich Bockman.
Hi.
Hi, Rich. How are you?
Doing good.
So we're starting to get a little bit of momentum here. So, Rich and I were talking before the beginning of the show about how we've had a few episodes now, and the theme is kind of becoming its own thing in terms of the volcano itself. So talk a little bit about Rich. So now I've known Rich now for 7 years, maybe 8 years. We met in a church basement, right? And in the interest of full disclosure, one of the closest human beings to me on the planet.
Oh, thank you, Jimmy.
So,
same here.
So I've known you now for some time, and and you're one of the people that I try to emulate in my life. So, the interesting thing is that when we share time, you get to learn stories about people. So, and you get vignettes, like you get bits and pieces, and you piece together parts of an individual's life based on the bits and pieces that you've learned. And what I found in these conversations that's been really interesting and compelling is that as we unpeel, you find out all these other things you didn't know. Once people kind of flow and get comfortable, you find out that there's some areas that were gray, or and I've done that with people now that I've known for decades. Come in here and I was like, holy shit, I never knew that. So Rich and I are, friends. We're also, close in recovery together. And, and so now are you originally from Jersey?
Yeah, born in New Brunswick and lived a good part of my life down the shore in Ocean County.
Ocean County. So were you on the beach a lot as a kid, or?
No, because we lived in Jackson, like out by Great Adventure, that area.
Okay.
Which is Ocean County, but it's still probably a half an hour from the beach.
Right.
Yeah.
So come from close-knit family, would you say, or?
No, Jimmy, I'd say that my family, well, I'm going to say up until I was 11, I guess my family would have been kind of your normal, typical middle-class family.
Okay.
And we lived in New Brunswick, and my father worked. He was a hardworking guy.
Okay.
He was a product of World War II and a product of the Depression.
Okay.
He only had a very basic education. I think he left school when he was in 6th grade.
Okay.
During the Depression, he went to work to help support his family. So that was his mindset.
Right.
And, my mother and he got married, and he went off to Europe.
Okay.
And when he got back, they bought a house in a neighborhood that was a really blue-collar neighborhood, row homes, duplexes.
Right.
And the housing was actually built for people there was a factory there called Wright, and they made airplane engines for airplanes.
What Wright engines? That sounds familiar. Do you
Well,
know
the
what
Wright
kind of
brothers.
aircraft? Oh, shit, really? Okay.
Yeah, it was the Wright brothers.
No wonder it sounds familiar. Okay, that makes sense.
I forget who they sold out to, but it was Wright something, and so this whole neighborhood was built for the employees to build these airplane engines for these aircraft in World War I.
Right.
The war ended, and Wright moved on, and people occupied these, and they were, soldiers coming back from the war and that kind of thing. Then we also had a lot of, they used to call them in those days DPs, which was sort of a slur.
What does DP stand for? Do you know?
Displaced person. So there were a lot of people that were displaced Eastern Europeans displaced during the war that came to the States and they lived there. So I grew up in a neighborhood that was interesting.
Now, what would you say, like the, Germans, Italians, like what was the background, or was it like a mix? Or
it was a mix, and I'd say that there was Irish, Italian, Eastern European, Hungarian, Lithuanian. There was also a mix of people that had come from Pennsylvania, the coal country, because it was depressed out there. So there was factories. It was just a big New Jersey in the 1950s was this industrial powerhouse. So all these factories were employing all these people, and they were moving there.
Right.
So my father worked in a factory up the street, and which was typical, and so did most of the people, their fathers in the neighborhood.
Right.
And the mother stayed home, and they raised their kids.
And that's what your mom did, stayed home and raised you?
Yeah.
Okay.
And my sister. I have an older sister.
Right. You and your older sister get along?
We do. Her health has been pretty bad lately. She's going to be 80.
Okay.
This December 29th. So I don't talk to her as much as I used to. But yeah, the two of us are what's pretty much left.
Right.
But
legacy becomes on the other side at some point, where it's like the youngers than you are your legacy rather than it's a weird transition. I'm finding that out. I'm on the newer side for me, but just seeing the ranks thin on the top end,
Yeah, especially when it comes to holidays and stuff like that.
Right. So now you said everything until you were 11, I think you said. What did that mean?
Well, when I was 11, my mother had developed a mental illness.
Okay.
And she became very depressed. And I didn't I was 11, so I didn't understand what was going on. But I could see there was a difference. And my parents started arguing a lot. And my mother was kind of acting strange.
Right.
And she started going to see a psychiatrist, and they didn't have a lot of medications.
Right.
But the ones they had were, addictive. So, she started off with Milltowns, and then moved into I'm trying to think of these other, the benzo type drugs.
Right.
So she got, she was not only have these mental health problems, but she had an addiction to those drugs and alcohol.
Right.
So once again, like I said, at 11 or 12 years old, I didn't understand what was going on. I just thought, this is insane.
Right.
I don't want to live here. I don't want to live like this.
Right.
So it changed, and we had moved from the city out to the suburbs, which, for my father, he came from poverty, and he was able to move himself up in the company, and he was able
Were they about the same age?
Yeah.
Right. So, but you mentioned when you talked about depression era, you talked more about your father than you mentioned your mother. And I wonder, I know my grandmother, okay, so here's a strange thing. I'm just realizing this now. So those that went to war were impacted in a way that both of my grandfathers came back different, right? But I think poverty, in a weird way, depending on what you experienced, changed you. I know my grandfather, my mother's father, fought through. He was a howitzer gunner, so he fought through Italy. He was in North Africa.
It's funny. That's what my father did
right,
too.
Right. Oh, was he? What was he? He was a gunner.
He was in charge of a howitzer unit in Holland and in Germany.
Whoa.
Yeah, that's what he did.
That's intense. Wow. Hold on a second. Woo. No shit.
Yeah.
Wow. So, but I noticed like being hungry, right? That changes people, right? You know what I mean? Like we consider poverty, right? What we consider poverty today, and depression era poverty was fucking next level, like soup line poverty. Like that was next level. And I think that in some odd way, it changed people's psychologies. You know what I mean? Like, their relationships with things like food, right? And
money.
Big
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Big time.
I remember I threw a penny away one time, and it was in the garbage, and it was encased in something, and I just was cleaning out a drawer, and I threw it away. And my father found that penny. He went berserk.
Right. Because that could have been
You didn't throw away money.
Money of all things, right?
Yeah, even if it was a penny, you didn't throw it away.
Right. And a penny today it's
Penny
almost
is a
worthless.
pain in the ass.
Yeah, right. It really is, right? You know what I mean? Like they have machines that you pay now a percentage of all the change you put in there just so it will get rid of your change so you don't have to, remember when we used to sit and put them in the tubes?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like nobody does that anymore. If you go to like one of those coin stars or whatever in a supermarket, they charge you like 20-30% to give you your change back. Yeah. It's ridiculous. So just to give you a slip that you could take and buy groceries or, get paper money for. It's ridiculous. You know what I mean? So, but okay. So, living in Jersey, now they stayed together in spite of the challenges, or did they divorce?
No, they stayed together,
right.
Which is probably, looking back in hindsight, probably something that shouldn't have happened, but they did.
Right. Did she carry that with her, the addiction and that through the rest of her life, or did she have stronger periods in her life where she was more grounded, or it was a slow, steady progression like it is for
everybody.
Right.
I think for most of my mother, it's funny. There was a period of time where my mother was going into hospitals the same time I was, which was an unusual situation. She was in Carrier Clinic about a month before I was in there.
Really?
And then we came out, and I remember, I went to some AA meetings with her.
Right.
But
But she was in the other she was in the fellowship though, so she was.
Yeah, for a short period of time.
Right.
I'm gonna say maybe about 6 months.
Enough that she had a familiarity with. So you saw that at least, like
Yeah.
Like you weren't the first person in your family to have familiarity with what 12-step program was. You saw that in what somebody else was doing. Whether or not they were having success with it or not was different. You go to a meeting with somebody else, and even if they're not the example, somebody else in the meeting might be. You know what I mean? So, okay. So, wow. Remember what I said? Like you start having these conversations and you realize all kinds of stuff you didn't know. There we go.
Yeah.
It didn't take us very long. So, okay. So, time goes on, right? You said that. So when did you first find that you also had a taste for escape or for substances? Because you said that there was a time when you and your mother were going at the same time so, do you recall like when you first drank or when you first smoked or when you first did those things?
Yeah, I think I was maybe about 13 or so, and I think it was just a group of we're talking about the early, maybe the mid 60s, and kids would have parties, house parties on the weekends.
Right.
So we would get together, and they'd put record player on, and kids would go down. You'd have all they'd all be down there, and you'd try to socialize. And I was very awkward. I felt like I just didn't think this was I couldn't fit in.
Right.
I had that strange feeling, and it was like I'm so uncomfortable being around people like that. Right. And then you want to talk to girls, you're interested, but then there's all the fears that come up. And I noticed, we went out one day, and before we went to the party, somebody got a couple beers out of their refrigerator, and I still remember we didn't have back then they didn't have Pop Tops. So you had to have a can opener, and we didn't have that, so we had to drive a nail into the can, and maybe 2 beers, and there was like about 3 or 4 of us. We drank the beers, and I remember going to the party, and that feeling went away, that uncomfortable feeling, that whatever it was, the hang-ups, the fears, all that stuff went away, and I felt like, oh man, I can fit in, I can dance with these girls. I can interact, and to me, this was like, oh man, I'm gonna do this again.
Right, a little liquid courage.
Yeah, this is gonna be fine. This is gonna help me. So that was the mindset that the whole thing started at. I didn't think to myself, oh, I'm gonna wind up in a drug program or.
I don't think anybody does. Frankly, nobody would ever. I remember when I was in. I guess this is in the late 70s or maybe early 80s. They would have these things where they would have a almost like a Scared Straight type thing, where they would bring somebody in to the school to talk to you, and they would tell like horror stories about where they had been before they had gotten clean or whatever. And they never really talked about recovery or anything like that. They just talked about basically the horrors of addiction. But to tell a kid that, you know what I mean? Like, you don't know shit from shit. So when you hear that, it's kind of like, oh yeah, drugs are bad. You know what I mean? Like, meanwhile, they were saying, they were doing the commercials where, they were showing eggs frying, and this is your brain on drugs and all that other stuff. So, and to me, I knew that drugs were bad. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there was frankly, I was on the side of the people that felt that, that was what you stayed away from until I had them. And once I tried them, I had the same experience you had. Like, I was like, oh, this makes me a person that can get past that social awkwardness. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'm still socially awkward, but I can venture into these situations where I'm socially awkward, and I just give a fuck a little bit less. Mm-hmm. It was like a, I'm going to say, I'm just like, wow, like, yeah, this is what I need.
Yeah, exactly.
This is what I need, right? Yeah. So, okay, so at 13, so now you're in what? Figure 8th grade, 9th grade?
Yeah, about that. Yeah, right? That's when you start getting interested in girls.
Right. And kept going with that, just basically like beer and, weed maybe? Or, I mean, were they smoking weed that much?
No, there was no weed around.
Right? Okay.
There was...
That was considered for the poor people, where like.
Well, no, there was just none around. It was in the. Right. It would have been you had to go into the city. Right. The first time I started buying weed, I had to go into the city, and the same guy that sold heroin sold pot.
Right.
And it came in a little
one-stop shop.
It came in a little brown bag.
Right.
I had to be a nickel bag.
I had to be swaggy back in those days. You know what I mean? There was nothing. You know what I mean? Even in the early years when I first started smoking pot, you know what I mean? It would be like sticks and stones. It would be like, it'd be a bunch of branches and, a bunch of seeds. And, so today they smoke that super.
Oh, who knows? Yeah. Today it's a different world.
Yeah. So.
But I didn't try drugs. It's funny. When I was young, I went to Catholic school, and I took a pledge to myself that I would never, see, in the neighborhood I grew up in, in New Brunswick. It was a hard neighborhood, so there were guys that were getting into trouble. So you had kids winding up going to reform school, getting arrested.
Right.
We had a guy on my block, Junior Stefanowski, and Junior, his father was a guy that would get drunk, fall asleep in bed smoking, and start the house on fire. So
Right.
he had a pretty troubled situation, and he got involved with drugs, and he overdosed and died. And that's probably about 1959.
Right. Okay.
There were other
So
people.
you witnessed that, and we're like,
Witnessed that.
wait, okay, like I didn't have that. Like nobody in my neighborhood really was outwardly like. That's an example where you go, okay, wait a minute, I don't want to be that.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. And if that was 59, so I was 8 years old. So I witnessed that, and
Did you go to school and make a pledge that I'm not going to be that?
I don't think so. I'm not sure, but I just remember personally having this feeling like
I'm never gonna do
I'm
that.
not going to do that. It doesn't make sense to me. I can't understand why somebody would do it. There are people getting arrested, going to jail. This guy, Skippy Guadagnino, he got arrested, and he went to jail, and they sent him off to a place in Kentucky, Lexington, Kentucky, for the Cure. So he went down.
Cure.
It was called.
That sounds like they beat you. It's like going down for the cure.
It was called the Narcotics Farm.
Okay.
And you could go there. It was a prison hospital,
Right.
the federal prison hospital, and you could go there, and they'd give you drugs.
Federal Prison Hospital.
Yeah, that was the only treatment really available to addicts.
Right.
So anyway, I saw this going on, and I said, I don't want any part of it. So even when I started drinking, I didn't think about doing other drugs.
Right. Right.
But then I remember it was the summer of between junior high school and high school.
Right.
One of my friends said, we're going to go sniff glue underneath the bridge. And I was very hesitant about that because in my mind I said, well, I made this pledge that I'm not going to do this. But the what do you call that? The influence, or when peer pressure.
Peer pressure. Right.
The peer pressure to fit in with that group of people was strong enough to make the pledge go away. And that broke the barrier for me, because then when I sniffed glue, I crossed over the line, and no bomb went off, no terrible thing happened to me. I'm not saying that I particularly I guess I enjoyed somewhat sniffing glue, but it wasn't like...
I almost accidentally killed myself sniffing glue. So we had, I went to tech school for commercial art, and they had like a back room where they had these, they had this projector. It was called a Lucille projector, and it had two wheels like this, and you would put a piece of art underneath of it, and you would adjust this lens, this big billows in a lens, and then you could lay a piece of parchment on top, and it had high lights on, and it was like a tent that come over top of you, and you could enlarge or decrease the size of an image, and then trace off that image so that you could use it for other art. And so it was like basically like a room in the back with a tent over it, right? So, and they had spray fixative, which was like spray glue. And so I cut the edge off of a plastic bag because they were all in there sniffing glue, and I wanted to be the guy. So I cut the corner off a plastic bag, and I was in there like, and then stick it to my face, and right?
Yeah.
Well, it glued itself to my face, and I blacked out. And the only thing that saved me was there was a little space about this big at the bottom
get some oxygen
where I
in.
could get some oxygen, because if it would have sealed all the way, I would have killed over and died. Right? You know what I mean? So, but there again, I was like against all that. Like how I went from being against all that to, like I say sometimes a gateway is a trapdoor. You know what I mean? Like, but there's situations where nobody tells you like glue is a drug, but if you're using it that way, it is. You know what I mean? If you're trying to escape yourself, you know what I mean? And and just to be cool. to be part of.
It ain't cool now, though. I don't want to tell anybody.
No.
I was a glue sniffer.
I was a glue sniffer. You know what I mean? But here we are. You know what I mean? Like, and you realize that, you know, and it's important for maybe for young people, you know, to realize that, you know, because we talk about the 12-step fellowship that, you know, the drug's a drug, and like alcohol is a drug, et cetera, et cetera. You know what I mean? But also that there are many other mind and mood altering substances that aren't really categorized as narcotics or drugs that you can buy off the shelf. You know, to this day, you could probably go into a porn shop and buy a bottle of Rush and snort the shit out of it and damn near black out. And that's, you know, basically, what is that? That's cleaning fluid, isn't it? Like it's, I
don't even know what that is.
Yeah, they used to sell it in like you know, in your, you know, your X-rated movie theaters and shit. It was like this little, and it had a little, it sounded like a little rattle in it. And what it was, I think it was dry cleaning fluid.
Oh, okay.
Right? And you would pop it and you snort it and you would, you know what I mean? And again, it was like, it was legal. You could buy it over the counter. Right. And now today they have things like Kratom and, you know, stuff that you can buy in a 7-Eleven or whatever. And I remember one point I tried that and I was like, oh, it was horrible. Just something to get
Kratom?
Kratom, it's called. It's like a, you know, it's basically, I think it's like just a natural, like probably some sort of plant. And then they spray it with some sort of a chemical.
Wow, that's amazing.
And, you know, but you can buy it in a 7-Eleven or in a store or whatever. And,
I'm real interested.
Right. One time I couldn't get weed and I was like, you know, let me try, you know what I mean? And an act of desperation. And it was like, it was horrible, but you know, but I was willing to try anything.
And those things, I think they're probably more of a poison than they were a drug.
Oh, absolutely. You know, the brain cells they're killing are just by the billions, you know what I mean? Like all in one fell swoop. And so you figure, you know, early on, you know what I mean? You feel uncomfortable in your skin. Boy, I could certainly relate to that. You try some things, you get a little liquid courage. The next thing you know, you're, you know, with a bunch of kids under a bridge sniffing glue, right?
Yeah.
Right? So, I mean, and at those stages, I know for me, you know, it was, my life was still manageable and I went back to my daily life, you know what I mean? And no worse for the wear, so to speak. So now you finished high school?
Yeah, I finished high school barely because I mean, I wasn't plugged in high school. I mean,
right.
I had all those other issues with the mother and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, I acted out. You know, I had, you know, I was getting arrested, going to detention centers.
Right.
Grades were crap.
Right.
So I had all these other kinds of issues and stuff going on. And I didn't see any future, but I was at a point, I guess, where I wanted to take the easiest way that I could. I wanted to glide. I didn't want to do a lot of work, but I still wanted to, like, you know, evade. Don't forget the war was going on too. The Vietnam War. So
now, were you signed up for the draft? Like, was your number floating around in there somewhere, or?
Well, I was before the lottery. Yeah, I was 1A for a very short period of time because I had a high school deferment. Then I went to college for a semester, so I was deferred there. And then the lottery came in, which was, I guess, 1970, 71. I'm not sure. And I wound up being far enough away from the low numbers.
Or we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Yeah.
You know, my dad went in, he was scared. He knew, and he figured, well, let me get ahead of it. Maybe at least if I sign up ahead of time, I'll be able to get in a position that's better. So we went to the recruitment depot and signed up. Mm-hmm. And they sent him to the I don't know what they called it in those years. In my years, it was what they called MEPS, which is Military Processing Station. So they would go and they'd do, you know, check this physique and all that other stuff. My dad was always a big guy, but I mean, I think he would have passed. But he said they came in and they were doing, like, he was standing there, you know, barefoot or whatever, and they were checking him up. And one doctor came over and looked at his feet. And he was like, wow. He called over another guy who said, look how flat this guy's feet are. And they said they tried to take one of those really thin metal rulers and slide it underneath his feet all the way around, and they couldn't get it underneath his feet anywhere. And they stamped him denied, or we probably wouldn't be having this conversation. Because he tried to sign up. He figured, let me just get ahead of this thing at least, and maybe I can get myself a good job or in a position where, and we probably, so there you go.
What year was that, Jimmy?
I don't know, to be honest. I'd love to be able to ask him.
Mm.
I'd love to be able to ask him. It's the reasons why we have these conversations, frankly. So, okay, dodged a bullet literally.
Mm-hmm.
We can call that dodged a bullet literally. So now we're in the age of free love, so to speak, right?
Yeah, this is 1969.
Did you kind of hippie up? Like, did you
No.
feel like, no? So you were still, you had 50s family. So you were still kind of like 50s mindset mostly, or, you know what I mean? Like crew cut and, and malts, or.
I wouldn't say that. Yeah, that's a strange time, Jimmy. It's like everybody thinks of the late 60s as being all hippies and peace and love, but it really was, that was a section. That there was an element there, but there was also the opposite element, and that was, you had construction workers and
would you have considered yourself more conservative if you had to identify, if you had to pick, like, you know what I mean, like those hippies or those conservatives,
rednecks.
Yeah, those rednecks, where you were in
I would be in whatever camp I thought would get me what I wanted.
Ooh, okay.
So I was at that point already a manipulator.
Right, chameleon.
A chameleon, and
Right.
I didn't have anti-war sentiments. I wasn't pro-U.S. I was mixed up.
Right.
I was mixed up.
Well, so was the world.
Self-centered.
You would have to say the world was mixed up too. So you just kind of like, still is, trying to identify where you're at even today is a bit of a challenge, because the world is all these different, these contrasts, you know what I mean? Like, there's right and there's wrong, and there's like right, wrong, you know what I mean? Like there's this mix somewhere in there where it's like, being in the middle is wrong too, but it's also not as wrong as those things on either side, because those are clearly wrong, and, it's all a shit show. So, okay. So, now when you say chameleon, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, how would you identify that was manifesting itself? Like, were you, so you figure you got out of high school, right? You went to college, but you said you went to college for what? One semester.
One semester and dropped out.
Right.
Came back to Jersey.
Was that because of the social scene? Because I got high? Or was it just because you said you struggled in high school?
Yeah, I struggled in high school.
Right. So you don't necessarily go to college with the tools to be able to get good. I know that was my experience. I only lasted 2 semesters. I mean, yes, because I got high, but it also was ill-equipped because I wasn't really a good high school student, right? And it was art college, so clearly, like, they weren't setting the bar very high academically, but just enough so I couldn't get past that. So what would you say was the reason why you only lasted a semester?
I was getting high all the time.
Okay.
First of all, the way I picked college,
right?
I had a friend from Jersey that his parents moved to Florida, and they bought this little hotel right on the beach in Hollywood, Florida. So I thought, and he kept saying to me, why don't you come down here and you can go to Miami-Dade Junior College.
Miami-Dade Junior College. What year would we say?
1969.
69.
So I thought, that sounds like something I could.
Still sounds good. Oh yeah, Miami-Dade Junior College. I'm going, man. I can see. I knew it would take a lot of.
I'll stay out of the draft.
Right.
I'll be in Florida. Right. I'll be with my homie.
Right.
And I'll be on the beach.
Right.
What? So
where do I sign? It would have been automatic. Like, okay.
So now you know why I only lasted a semester, because I didn't go to school. I didn't apply myself.
Right.
And plus the progression, things were starting to, pick up. I mean,
you say progression of the disease of addiction.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. Because
so,
now I had there wasn't.
There was no oversight.
No oversight.
Right.
So, I was living in an apartment. We had a 1-bedroom apartment in Hollywood. And I had 3 roommates. and the rent was $90 a month. We split 4 ways.
Right.
So I had a lot of extra money,
Right.
and I just
Yeah.
drank it up,
Right.
you know.
Right.
And we had a party every night. You know, nobody was doing anything. No, you know.
So none of the other kids really stuck and stayed and had success, do you think? Or you did
No, the other
anybody...
guy, he left after a semester too, and then the other 2 guys they were just hanging out. I mean, they were doing construction labor jobs, and they'd work for a week and then
Right.
quit, and you know, that kind of stuff. And that's was the mindset. You know, you talk about 18-year-old kids in Florida in 1969.
Work just enough.
Yeah,
Right.
chase girls.
The funny thing is that we see kids these days and we say, look at these kids these days and how fucked up they are. And then we look back over time and you realize just about every generation and the age group that it's not that this generation's fucked up. It's that age group, letting an 18-year-old or a 22-year-old or a 25-year-old be that responsibility level for that age category. You know, we get older and we get all curmudgeon-y because we expect other people to be like us. Mm-hmm. But the reality of it is even us weren't like us at that age.
No.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, and sometimes to this day, you know, I think to myself, like, did I turn into Mr. Get Off My Fucking Lawn?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I'm like, you know, where did I get curmudgeon-y? And you kids don't understand. And, you know what I mean? I walked up the hill, you know, in the snowstorm, both ways, barefoot, you know, and I killed a bear with my loose leaf notebook. You know what I mean? Like, no, I didn't. You know what I mean? Like, I lived a pretty, you know, escapist chameleon life. Mm-hmm. So you drop out of school. What then? Come back?
I had this experience. This would be a little hard for me to explain this, but this is the best I can do. That was the first time I was away from home. I was 18. I was living down there, and all this chaos was going on. And I was just so homesick. I didn't like it. I wanted to get out of there. I wanted to go back. But I was sticking it out, and I couldn't live like it. It was like I couldn't bear it. And
you mean being away from home, like being homesick?
Whatever was going on with me, I was like, I was just in this state of like troubledness and tension and anxiety, and I just couldn't take it. And what happened was, and I don't know why this happened, Jimmy, it was the strangest thing. I woke up did you ever read The Power of Now?
Sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Sounds familiar.
Well, this guy had the same kind of an experience. And he just was sitting on a bench. But I woke up one day, and all of that stuff was lifted from me. I woke up a completely different human being. I had no insecurities. I didn't feel any kind of like any way about anything. I was like totally freed of
it's like
all.
It just cracked something. Like
Yeah, and I didn't know what was going on, but I was kind of going with the flow.
Wow.
And it lasted. Maybe let's say this happened in November of '69, and when I came home that Christmas time, within maybe a week or two, it had disappeared, and I was back to my old way. And in my mind, I thought, well, something is not going right here in New Jersey. That I need to get back to Florida, where I had that sort of bliss.
Yes,
thing that
uplifting
happened.
Experience, right?
So what happened was I was home for a couple of weeks, and my friend from Florida said, "I'm going back. You want to come with me?" And I said, "Yeah." So back then you could take cars from New Jersey or New York and drive them for people down to Florida.
Right, before car transport. That was car transport.
Yeah, so we got an MGB, and we were taking it to Sarasota, Florida. Got there, wound up hitchhiking, taking a bus, blah, blah, blah. But we got back to Hollywood, and we had a room in a hotel, a motel really out there. And I stayed there until I got arrested. I think it was about maybe April or so of 1970.
Stayed there till I got arrested.
Things were going down.
Yes. Yeah,
Things were definitely going down. And I always tell people, 1970, they didn't have a term called homelessness. In Florida,
right.
I was unable to support myself. So it was, I think the crime was no visible means of support.
Really? So they basically saw that you were destitute and broke.
Well, I was panhandling to get money for wine on the corner, and the police came along and snatched my ass up.
Okay.
And I wound up in the local jail.
You're like, listen, man, I'm just trying to get some wine. Leave me alone. Cops.
And my bail was $40, and I didn't have bail. And my friend's brother had to come bail me out.
All right. So, wow. Okay. So you figure Florida, big relief, right? Back to Jersey, weight comes back on. Back to Florida, no big relief the second time, right?
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Just progressiveness of the disease, right? So what do you do after that? Like finally, eventually you got out of jail. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Right? So
how long can they keep you in jail?
Somebody come up with the $40 or whatever the hell it was, right? Because you're here, right? So what ended up happening? Did you come back, or did you stay in Florida for a while?
With my tail between my legs, right? I had to call mom and dad. And they said
that went well.
They gave me the $40 to pay back my friend.
Oh my God!
And an airplane ticket from Fort Lauderdale home.
Airplane tickets in those days had to be a big thing. Flying in the '60s.
Yeah.
Like today, it's ubiquitous. It's common. Like, I'm going to Cali. I'm going here. Going there. To have somebody buy a plane ticket for you to fly. In the '60s, I think based on just the experience I've seen in the last 30 years or so, it's changed how much more commonplace it is to just catch a plane and fly. So, you know what I mean? Like, it's more extreme, right? To have your family like buy you a plane ticket to fly you back.
Yeah.
Right. You know what I mean? Like
humiliation.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So did they have things to say to you when you got back?
About, yeah. It was because I left with the idea that I'm leaving home. I'm going to forge my own life. I'll see you. And,
and then come back.
Yeah, come back 6 months later.
Dean's over here waving, bye. Sorry, man. He's going to Japan and what is it? What, the 19th?
Yeah, I think 18th or 19th. I'm leaving for Japan.
His son lives in Japan with his wife and his grandson.
Lives in.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's insane.
Don't be getting any ideas. We need you here.
I don't worry. I'm going there to visit. I've heard stories about people actually living there, and that while it's cool and it's great, I'd like to be home.
Right. So, well, I'm not sure what part of Japan he's in, but you know what I mean. If you get the pickle.
Where are you going in Japan? What city?
So our itinerary in Japan looks like Tokyo, Osaka, and then Kyoto, then Osaka. So we're hitting those major 3 areas because I didn't want to be gone for too long, but I also want to experience at least the mainstays of where I was going for that.
Have fun.
Thank you.
I don't think it's going to suck.
No, he's should have a great time.
Yeah, he's going to have a great time.
Yeah.
So you come back, tail between your legs. Do you get a job?
Yeah, I got a job.
What was the job that you, after all that?
I made mattresses.
Okay.
Mostly sort of like
hometown factory kind of thing or nearby.
Yeah.
Did you go back to mom and dad's house or?
Yeah. Went back to mom and dad's house for a while, not too long. Worked, I always had like these jobs that would last a short period of time. I get like factory. I hated factory jobs. Absolutely despised them. And I had that at the
Well,
mattress.
it's the grind. You know, what I'm saying? It's
The whistle would
grind.
go.
Yeah,
You could go to work. Now you can have 5 minutes to go pee. I hated it. But I had a job, and I moved out of my parents' house, and I got a job as a gutter mechanic. You know what that is?
No, I don't.
Okay.
No.
Those,
I have I pictured 15 things a gutter mechanic could be right there.
Go
So you
get
have to
that
tell
guy
me
out
which-
of the gutter.
Yeah, tell me what a gutter mechanic is, because I picture a lot of different things.
You've probably seen these trucks. They come by. You open it up, and there's a roll of aluminum in the back.
Okay.
And they put the aluminum through a die, and it turns out a section of gutter.
Right. Okay.
So that's what we would do. Like whether
So
it was
you would manufacture from sheet goods the formed gutter that then they would use to
hang on the building,
buildings or whatever.
and then put the down the.
I never heard
leaders.
that called gutter mechanic though. That's pretty interesting.
Well, it sounds better than just.
I was a sanitation worker. Yeah, well, hey, you gotta eat. You do what you
So
gotta
I did
do.
that, and I was hanging out. We had an apartment right on Rutgers campus in downtown New Brunswick. So
Okay.
it was a big party, and then I decided to go back to Florida one more time to
Just to make sure
get
that
to
some wino got my corner and
to clean up and go down there and finish college.
right.
And I didn't, but
Yeah, right.
I got down there, and the drug thing started to take off more. And I did finish the semester,
Okay.
and I came back. Once the semester was over, I came back, and the drug thing really started to take off. And that I'm trying to think what year that was. I think that was 1971.
Right.
And I got my first drug habit in 1971, and I was working as a security guard, and I worked at a plant that made different sulfur products for agriculture.
Okay.
And
Now, when you say got a habit, what are we talking about here?
a heroin habit.
Okay. So really, okay.
Yeah, so I had a heroin habit, and my connection was one of my coworkers, and also some friends that I had.
Right.
So my coworker.
How does that really happen anyway for you? Like, because, you just eventually one day go, okay, you know what I mean? Because you try all different other types of drugs, right?
Mhm.
And then one day somebody just says, hey, try some H, or, how did that really?
Well, I started using heroin in high school, so
Right.
I had done it. But I first of all, when I did it, I looked at people that were heroin addicts, and I would say, I don't understand how they could wind up getting addicted to something.
Until you taste heroin.
Well, no, even when I did it at first, I thought, I have the willpower.
Now, were
To
you
stop.
a snorter at first? Like,
Yeah,
like
probably
a lot-
the first
yeah,
few
yeah,
times,
yeah.
and then started.
Yeah, I've snorted heroin. I've never really been like a shooter. It's never really been my style. But, you snort heroin, you realize why people like it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I enjoyed the high. It was back then. It was cheap. A bag of heroin was $3,
Right.
and it was strong heroin. This is in the 66, 67 era, I guess.
Right.
But anyway, so that was in the back of my mind, and I had been doing other drugs, but never concentrating on any one thing until I would say in Florida. One of my friends had a buddy that was in Vietnam,
Okay.
and he was sending Vietnamese heroin back through the mail to the United States. And that was like not on the same level of any other kind of drug that
Yeah.
you could get.
Hardcore, strong.
Yeah, really powerful stuff. And I started using that, and then I had another friend.
And through the U.S. mail, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah, through the U.S. mail.
How about that?
Crazy. And I had another friend his father owned a drugstore in Tampa.
Okay.
So he was taking morphine out of the safe, and he was giving it to me to sell. But I wasn't selling shit. I was using it all. And But anyway, I mean that's a sideshow. But now you asked why? How do you get involved with something like
Right.
that? Well, that is a progression too, And,
Right.
but I didn't have a habit even then. But when I got back to Jersey, I started getting high every day, and I got a habit, and I didn't realize even that I had a habit. I still was of the mindset that I can stop doing this anytime because I have that kind of willpower.
Right.
And then this guy who was my connection, he got high. We were at work, and he OD'd, and boom, right down. And like I said, we were both security guards, and I had to make a decision.
He's not watching anybody or the goods or anything. Clearly, you know what I
Yeah.
mean. Like, you know what I mean. He's on the job, but he's not really on the job.
Yeah, he wasn't doing. Neither of us. We were getting high, but anyway, I had to make a decision what to do. So I did not think that I could live with just letting this guy go, letting him die.
Right.
So I called the ambulance, and they came and got him. And I took his drugs that I thought I found. I went through his pockets. I got all the drugs out of him that I thought.
Right.
But he had some in his shoe. So he got busted. The police got involved. My father was the one who got me this job. So the employer contacted my father. So everything came down on me. And that's when I was forced into my first drug program, which was the summer of 1971.
Is that the one where you were in Cali, or did that come?
No,
later?
this is the first
later.
one. Yeah,
Okay. Where was the first drug program?
North Brunswick, New Jersey.
Was it like one of the ones where it was like prison?
Yeah, scared straight
kind of. Right.
screaming and yelling, and it was your typical drug program.
Well, that didn't work, did it?
It did.
Did it at first? Okay.
And here's the funny thing about it. The philosophy. This is 1971. There was very few people that got clean
Right.
in 1971,
Right.
and there was very few places you could go to get clean.
Right.
So this guy who ran this drug program was out in a place called Synanon with his wife. He came here to back to Jersey, and they opened up this drug program. And I stopped shooting dope, and the drug program said that you can't use illegal drugs, and you can't. If a doctor prescribes it, that's a way. You know what I mean? That's okay.
Still going on today. Isn't it though? It's still happening today. You know what I mean? Like if a doctor prescribes it.
The doctor said it's okay. So
Right.
So I was taking Quaaludes at that time to get to sleep at night. And Quaaludes were developed under we were told that these were non-habit forming drugs, and they were a substitute for barbiturates.
Right.
So this was a safe way to go to sleep at night.
Good Lord.
So everybody in the drug program they didn't say like, oh, you're doing Quaaludes. They said, oh, okay, well, doctor said it's okay. And the other thing was alcohol was not a drug.
Right.
So all the people who worked in the drug program were drinking.
Right.
And I didn't see anybody like an alcoholic. I mean, I didn't see him going crazy with alcohol.
Right.
And we would drink. But like we've learned that the progression happens no matter what. If you use
Right.
It doesn't matter what we use.
It finds a way. It's like water finding its way to the lowest possible.
Shit's going to happen, man. It's just going to happen.
Right,
So,
right.
I mean, I thought I was clean. They told me I was clean.
Right.
They gave me a new title called Ex-Addict. I was an ex-addict.
You're an ex-addict? Oh, that's really cool.
And I
Don't
got
you
a
wish you
job.
could be an ex-addict today? Oh, I'm an ex-addict.
I'm an ex-addict.
Put X on my chest.
So yeah, I guess you could say it worked. I had graduated the program, became an ex-addict, was hired by the program, and worked for the state of New Jersey, and still was taking drugs and drinking, and
nobody was telling you that it was bad or whatever.
no, they were doing the same thing.
I remember at one point, so you really couldn't get Quaaludes by the time I was really had entered into the scene, which was like the mid to late 80s, right? But one time somebody showed up with a couple Quaaludes and I had one of them and I was like, whoa, intense. You know what I mean? Like it was just like, it was like drugs from a previous era that just showed up, you know what I mean? And I was like, oh, Quaaludes, like I've heard about these things. Like, oh, okay, it's funny, sometimes just even like a one-time experience or a few-time experience with something, and then we, and you hear about that, and, because otherwise I'd be like Quaalude, and I'd be like, yeah, whatever, but I'm like, oh. And maybe that's the disease too, if that makes sense, because the disease, like, for whatever reason, tries to hold on to some relation to a sense, a feeling, like that Quaalude. I was, Quaaludes.
Sounds exotic.
Tasty. You know what I'm saying? Like, let's be real. You know what I mean? Like, I remember Quaaludes. You know what I mean? Like, it's it's not like I had like a long tryst with. I mean, I think I had them once. You know what I mean? Like, it's all it takes. I think that's the progression of the disease still to this day. That, you know what I mean? That how much it requires to just remind myself that nothing good will come of this. Because the first inclination, the first thing I hear is, tasty. I mean, like, that's how powerful, you know what I mean? Like, once you're wired that way, you don't, I think that's the danger of being an ex-addict, is it's a total misclassification of what an addict really is. Yeah. Because once you're wired that way, you can't, a pickle can never be a cucumber, right? You know what I mean? Yeah. And that's really true. You know what I mean? Like once your brain chemistry is wired that way, it doesn't necessarily mean that, that we don't heal and change and grow, or that drugs don't even necessarily appeal to us. But at any given moment, there's a strange appeal.
Yeah.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah, oh yeah. It's still to this day. I mean, I've been clean a long time, and I still have warped ideas.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
So, okay, so in rehab, out of rehab, well, we call it rehab, but program, right? Ex-addict, working in the place where you got clean, right? I do remember you telling a story about how that went awry at some point. Is that correct? Okay, so how did that happen? Like what... At some point, you decided that you were going to go back to the old way, but you still stayed at the gig, right? Like, is that how that worked, or?
Well, yeah. There was a bunch of things that happened. I would say, first of all, I was going to college when I was working for them. The state was paying my tuition, so I was going to college with the guy who was the guy that came from Synanon. The two of us were going to school. So I didn't have a lot of time to do much. I was working full-time, going to school full-time, and that kept me busy. Plus, at the time, I had a pretty serious relationship with a girl, and we were planning on getting married, but I wanted to finish school first.
Okay.
So what had happened was she wanted to get married and did not want to wait any longer. And that ended that relationship. And that, I didn't have the coping skills to deal with that.
Well, except for the obvious.
Except for the obvious.
Right.
So I was dousing it. I mean, I was drinking heavier and heavier to cope with that. And then shortly after that relationship broke up, my father died. And now I had that to deal with, and I didn't know how to. I just didn't know how to do it. I had this terrible sense that I had to somehow step into his shoes.
To be there for your mom, who
had
her illness. And
I had to be an adult on a different level.
Right.
And I wasn't happening. I mean, I wasn't there. I was just, I was 25 years old, and I, wasn't happening. So I had the experience, the exact experience was I was at a football game, Rutgers football game, with a friend of mine, and we both had dates, and we were drinking Italian wine out of those baskets with the bottle in it. I don't know, Chianti or something maybe it was. Yes, and we're passing it back and forth. So we're buzzed up on wine. And Jimmy, out of clear blue sky, the thought comes to me, let's drop this girl off. You get in your car, Rich, drive to New York, and buy some heroin. And it sounded like a good idea. Meanwhile, I was working at a drug program.
Right.
And, I think if I wasn't under the influence of the crazy-ass wine, I think there would have been some common sense would have said, well, what are you going to risk everything that you've worked for all this?
Right.
This is nuts. This is crazy thought.
Right.
But I didn't. So I did. I took her back. I took her home. I dropped her off, and I just drove into the city. And don't forget, I hadn't been using drugs now or heroin anyway, for like 5 years. So I didn't even know what neighborhood was what, And so I just drive into the shittiest section of the Lower East Side of Manhattan and just walked up to some guy and said, hey.
Where do I get heroin?
Yeah.
That was pretty easy at that point, though.
Yeah, I just happened to pull into the neighborhood, which was at the time the drug center of the country. It was the Kensington of its day.
The Kensington of its day, right?
Yeah.
So it's just kind of like, get me what I want.
And once I had one, and I woke up the next day, I thought, oh man, the guilt came in. I said, what did I do? I can't believe I did it. I can't tell anybody. This will never happen again. This was insanity. And do you know, maybe it lasted about a week or two, and the thought kept coming back. Well, you got some money. Why don't you go back in again? No. And I'd fight it back and forth. The obsession took over to where at the end of all this stuff, I had no control, bro.
Right.
You're saying, well, how could you work in a drug program and be shooting dope? Well, I would not want to do it.
Right. But you didn't have a choice.
I didn't have a choice. Yeah. I was like a mad dog. I was one of Pavlov's dogs, man. When I had that money in my pocket, right. I was going, man. Right. And it wasn't nothing stopping me. And I would go through this same cycle over and over again. I would go in there. I'd be in the ghetto for the weekend. Sunday, probably 2:00 in the morning, I'd be coming back out, totally pissing broke, not a fucking dime to myself. And I'd be coming through the Holland Tunnel, and I would look up, and I don't know if you've ever been in that neighborhood, but you're coming out of there, and there was this huge group of buildings called the Jersey City Medical Center. It was built during the 1930s, during the Depression. It looked like the buildings that like Superman would jump off of and fly around.
They look like they're judging you.
Yeah.
Like they've got that like ominous, like, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, they look like, what have you been doing? Right?
And the remorse.
Yes, right.
And the guilt and the shame. Only an addict can understand that.
Yeah.
Understand the self-hatred. Why? How did you let this happen again? And I would swear it off, Jim. I would be, oh man, I said, thank God I'm alive. I got through this. Don't forget where I was. I was basically a suburban white kid, right, in an abandonmenium in the Lower East Side with the roof burned out, no running water, no electricity, with a group of junkies sharing needles in a room lit by candles.
Right.
And I got out of that, and I'd say to myself, what's appealing to you? Why are you doing this? And I couldn't understand
the land of no choice.
Yeah.
The land of no choice.
Right. And here's the sick thing. I've been clean 45 years. There's still something appealing about that room full of drug addicts.
Yeah, I understand that.
And that only an addict understands. If you tell that to a normal person, they'd say, oh, you're a sick fuck. Yeah. Get a doctor in here. Get this guy out of here.
Right?
Yeah. And that's why I know it's a disease.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's no such thing as ex-addict. That doesn't exist. Yeah. But it sounds good. You know what I mean? I want to get some shirts made. You're getting one. I'll be like, ex-addict. Yeah, right? So watch them fucking crucify you at a meeting. Just wear that shit and go in there and be like, oh, I'm an ex-addict. I don't know what you're talking about. Man, when people say that shit, and people do sometimes, you know what I mean? Like, I used to be an addict. You know what I mean? Actually, there are treatment programs today. They'll run a commercial on TV and they'll say, I used to be an addict. There was one a year or two ago, and I was just like, oh my God, they have no idea the level of bullshit that is. Wow. Now you're going back and still working, so like walking through the doors of the clinic or whatever must have been torturous, right?
Yeah, because I had to tell people how to stay clean.
Oh my God!
And you know, so all these people are in there, right? The clients,
Right.
So, and
Do
some
you
of
think
them
anybody ever sensed that?
oh yeah. I remember a young kid, Billy Spratt, and Billy Spratt was a kid that lived in a car, and he had frostbite, so it fucked up his legs. And he was a street kid, a real
Right.
street urchin, young but a hardcore kid,
Right.
and no bullshit.
Right.
And I remember him saying to me, "Man, those tracks on your arm look kind of blue."
Like they're new. Like
Yeah.
they're not. Yeah, they're not old. Yeah, and like what are you talking about? Long sleeves from now on.
Long sleeves.
fucking right.
So yeah, man, people are. You can only, I don't know. For me, I could cover my tracks as well as I did for a couple of years, but listen, man, that is, if there was ever a low to my life, it was that. Living these two lives, one of Mr. Clean, drug counselor, give you the advice, and at the same time, Mr. hanging out in abandonmentium shooting dope. To live
So
that,
that's the edge of the volcano right there.
Oh,
now
that's
we're
it,
walking.
man.
Yeah, there we are. See, that's why we do this. There you go, right there.
if you
know?
get to that place in your life where
Yeah.
you're that much of a phony fuck and you live that kind of life, you know what I'm talking about, man, because it is brutal. What it did to me spiritually is beyond belief. It
Right.
ruined it. I mean, I was like, it took a long time to heal from that kind of nonsense that I put myself through.
Right.
So,
Well, what they say in the literature, we're relieved to find that we have a disease and not a moral dilemma. Like, thank fucking God for that.
but
'Cause
I
if
didn't
it wasn't
believe
for
that.
that. Well, sure. Neither did I. You know what I mean? Like, at some point, you buy into the literature for your own fucking sanity. Because otherwise, I would have fucking shot myself.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You know what I mean? Like, for my behavior and my past transgressions and what I had been and what I had done. Right? And you look at that as, well, that's because I have a moral failing. Like, if I'm to believe that, we might as well just go jump into a fucking,
Yeah, 'cause
into a tree shredder.
You can't
'cause-
get better.
No, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, the concept, like, same thing with the concept of a disease.
Mm-hmm.
At first, I heard that, and I was like, oh, that's just a motherfucking cop-out. You know what I mean? Like, disease, there ain't no fucking disease. And then, you realize, one thing you realize that after all these years, that nasty fucking bullshit sounds appealing. How is that, right? You know what I mean? Like, after all this work and all this time and all this distance, right? You know what I mean? Like, that it still somehow is deeply ingrained in your psyche that somehow it sounds appealing, even when, like, so, so it doesn't go away, right? You know what I mean? Like, there is no cure, right? And then the other part, which is that, okay, so we have disease, not a moral dilemma, right? So, because without seeing that, that I lived in the land of no choice. I heard this one time and I fucking laughed my ass off. I just thought it was a fucking great way of explaining it. Like, there was a speaker tape or something, and this guy said something to the effect of, you know what I mean? Like getting high was like, seeing a gorilla in a cage. And you look at the gorilla and go, oh, that looks really good. That looks really appealing. Gorilla's like, oh, come on, hop in here. I'm sexy, whatever. He said, But once I climb in the cage, the gorilla decides where it's going to go from here.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You know what I mean? And that's really the truth. You know what I mean? Like, that one too many, 1,000 is never enough. Like, without having the application of being able to look at, like you talked about, you know what I mean? Like, just drinking. You know what I mean? Like it's just drinking, or it's just, you know what I mean? And how that transgresses in, because the disease can't really tell what substance it is. It doesn't really fucking know. It doesn't really matter. And somebody just said something to me yesterday that would fucking just, I'm going to fucking grind your gears for a second. Because somebody said to me on social media a couple days ago, something to the effect of, I slipped up 40 days ago and I drank. And now, he said, I'm on marijuana maintenance. He said, and California clean is what he called it. And he said, I'm really looking forward to, I really want to go back and work the 12 steps. But I know I can't go to the place where I used to go, which was where you and I met. So where else could I possibly go? And I said, listen, man, you're always welcome. And then a friend of mine that we buried 2 years ago on Thanksgiving Day, who was on that same California Clean program, until he smoked a joint that had fucking fentanyl in it. You know?
Really?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Wow.
I think so. Fentanyl in his system. You know what I mean? And, you know, and you go, well, there is no such thing as fucking California Clean. It don't exist. But the justification, rationalization around trying to still use somehow, right? You know what I mean? Will take any kind of objective position it possibly can so that you can still be adjusted, so that you can still not face the reality of what it feels like to deal with the storm that rests between your fucking ears without anything, all natural, without nothing. Right. And then, you know, and that same thing, like, you know, I've dealt with people who are on, you know, we don't suggest that, you know, we're not doctors. Right. So you deal with, you know what I mean? And people have mental health issues. I know I've spent time in, you know, in the VA, PTSD and otherwise or whatever, but you have people who are on SSRIs, or, you know what I mean? Like they're, you know, they're basically meant to, you know, help you cope with, you know, with those mental health issues that you have. But what they also really do is, when I was on them after my dad died, you know what I mean? I was like, I wasn't really sad about anything. And I remember at one point, you know what I mean? Like I was going through some difficulties wrestling with, you know, his mother over shit and whatever, and stuff that really should have pissed me off. And I just was like, whatever, you know what I mean? And at one point I realized that I'd stopped taking them. Because I was, like I said, I remember blurting out, I feel like somebody's taking a tooth out of the lion. Not like I was ever a fucking lion, let's be real. But it just made it so that I wasn't, as it was, I wasn't really necessarily willing to stick up for myself because I didn't see value in myself. But then on top of it, it was like this thing that I was taking. And I've known other people that, you know, that are clean, but are also simultaneously like given these drugs by a doctor. And going through the process of the step process with them. And my observations, and this is from the outside looking in, was it wasn't doing the same thing for them that it did for me. And the reason why was because I was fucking tortured. Like I had to find a fucking solution, right? Because I was in a really, really bad place in my head, and I needed to find a solution for the fucking storm. But what do you do if there's less storm?
Yeah.
Do you get the same coping skills? I saw firsthand that it didn't work for at least one individual that I work with, right? Because you have to be in it. There's just no way to fuck around it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, because you get some cut on it somehow. And now I can't necessarily speak, you know, what do they say? Absolutes by their very nature are wrong, right? You know what I mean? Because there's always, you know, but to me, it was kind of like the observations that I made in those situations make me like, now when I find out somebody's on those things, I'm caught between not trying to judge because, you know, we don't have any opinion on outside issues. And the other part, which is like, fuck, you know what I mean? Like, you really want this thing to work, right? Well, you know what I mean? Like, there's only one way to do it. And now there's all these things, all these programs, all these things that tell you that basically all paths to recovery. right? You know what I mean? And then we have our one path, right? There is no all paths, right? And to me, it's like, okay, like we don't want to draw judgment on. There are other paths to recovery besides the one that we take. Mm-hmm. But on the other side, you know, there's part of me that says there's justifications and rationalizations around all paths.
What do you mean?
Well, because that path could include mind and mood altering substances that, you know, where I can escape the dis-ease that rests between my ears, so I never really have to cope with it. And all paths can really ultimately be just a side way or a way around instead of a way through. Mm-hmm. And there is no fucking way around. If there was, we'd be doing it. Clearly, based on this conversation, we would have figured out another way so that we could still be using successfully, and you know what I mean, like having cocktails after this, but we can't, you know what I mean, like, and because there's no fucking way around it. There's just one way, and the way is through it. And it's sad because there's so much financial, you know what I mean. There's so much, you know. So back to, and at any point if we gotta take a break, we can. You know what I mean? Cup of coffee. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? How you feeling?
I'm feeling great. Okay,
cool. Let's keep going then. So, all right. So, at some point, what happens? You get caught at the clinic, like, you know what I mean, like
busted.
What they call the cops on you? They come raid on you, or they just sit you down and be like, hey, listen, we know what the fuck's going on.
I was over in the city, and I was, you know, those tenement houses had stoops,
right,
and there'd be one stoop after another. People would be hanging out there. So I guess I was nodding on the stoop, you know, doing what you do. And for some reason, some of the people that were in the drug program, I think maybe they went over for a Broadway play or something. I don't know what it was. And I don't know how they wound up in that neighborhood. But they drove by and saw me.
Hey,
that's my counselor.
Ouch.
So when I came to work that Monday morning, it was a surprise.
Oh man.
You know, what do you?
So they
doing?
just put your shit in a box and walk you out the front door?
No, because they knew me. You know, it was like, what's going on? And you know, Jimmy, I tell you, it was almost a relief.
Yeah, I could imagine.
To live in that way, man, and finally somebody, you know, okay, it's over.
To feel like a crumb like that, you know what I mean? To know that you were living two lives. Yeah.
So it was over. I surrender. I'm going to, and in my mind, I'm thinking, I got to get out of here. I got to go as far away as I can. I got to get away, maybe for 10 years or something, and then I'll come back and people will.
Was that how you ended up in Cali?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
right.
So. I guess, and I don't remember. It was kind of foggy, but two of my friends took me to the airport, put me on a plane, and I flew out to San Francisco, and went into Synanon.
Right. Tell that story, because I've heard you tell it at least once, and the Synanon story is a blast.
Well, let me tell you, this is strange because, you know, I have 3 children.
Okay.
And my daughter comes over on Wednesdays.
Okay.
So yesterday we were sitting around and we were talking, and she said, Dad, tell me about the cult you were in.
Yeah.
So I just told this story yesterday. It's kind of strange how...
Well, don't spare any details you spared her here. You know what I'm saying? You can skirt around it there, but because it's your kid. But here, you might as well just let it all...
All right. So this is what happened to me. You know, I got out there, and the next morning... I woke up, I guess I got a hotel room, and got a cab to Synanon. And
spell Synanon, S-I-N-N, like sin?
No, S-Y-N-O-N.
Synanon. Okay.
Synanon.
Right.
And like I said, maybe they made the arrangements where I was going. So San Francisco, because they had facilities in Marin County, San Francisco, Oakland, and then down south, like
you figure this is what, like mid 70 what?
77.
7. Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, they have an interview. So I went in for the interview. They interviewed me. They took everything. You know, my wallet, my identification, my money. Give me a receipt
You're
for the
not
money.
going anywhere, buddy.
And then they take you downstairs and shave your head. And they give you a pair of like farmer gray overalls.
Right.
With the bib in the front. So then you walk out into the facility, if you want to call it that. I don't know. The building itself was once a paint factory. Okay. So it was a converted paint factory into all these people there. And you walk around, and there's all these guys that are in bibs with shaved heads. All the women have shaved heads and have farmer grays on. And all the little kids are shaved heads.
Little kids? I didn't know that. There were kids there?
There's kids there. There's...
What, families of the people that went, they brought their kids with them? Or
and then they took their kids from them and they raised them in a separate communal exercise.
Can I go on? Jesus Christ. Wow.
So I went there to sort of escape, and I went with the understanding of the place from what my sort of mentor...
You went to escape to a place where it seems like there was no fucking escape.
Well, it dawned on me after being there a while that, you know, I probably, once again, mate, well, you did it this time, Rich.
You know what I mean? It's nice knowing you're Rich.
So I was put on the new guy's detail. So I was cleaning up. There was doctor's offices in there. Because at this point, it had gone from being a drug thing to there was a whole component of, they called them squares.
Okay.
And squares were people that never used drugs. They went there and they gave them all their money and they wanted to live that lifestyle. And they lived there. So you had...
Like a commune almost. Like a commune. Right,
yeah.
Exactly. So it wasn't all... So it was like you could get there a bunch of different ways, but it all looked the same once you were behind the door.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you know.
So some of the stranger things that went on there is that they had what they call a mean weight. So when you went there, they told you how much you could weigh, and you had to weigh that much. So anybody, and let's face it, other people, there's groups of people that have different body types.
Right.
So they're never going to get to this
Right.
weight that they said that they had to get to. So what they would do is
It's like a way of starving you.
they would shame you. You weren't able to eat with other people. You had to eat by yourself. You were like a shamed person. And the food was like, weird food because they procured it.
Wow.
You'd have like peanut butter sandwiches and crab legs. Whatever they decided to do.
I heard one time that the best diet that you would ever be on was a diet where nothing tasted good.
Then you would have been good
Yes.
there because the only thing was good was the peanut. Even the peanut butter sucked because they made it themselves. It wasn't. It wasn't like
even
Jiffy.
really Jiffy. It was like ground peanuts. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
With the little,
home-
yeah. That always sucks. I've tried it. My mom and dad used to try and convince me, like, this is the really good peanut butter, and I'm like,
No, I mean, it's horrible.
Yeah, give me the
Terrible,
Jeff.
terrible.
Give me the Jeff.
And that place kind of stunk like shit because, like I said, there were these doctors' offices, and I don't know what the hell they were doing up there. But man, I used to have to clean that stuff up, and it was nasty. But anyway, down to more serious stuff. They had the kids, and the kids were, like little robots. And I wasn't sure what was going on. They had the thing there, it was called the game, that you played the game. And the game was like this intense confrontation therapy session where you screamed at each other. And everybody would be screaming. The spit would be flying out of their faces. You mother. And then, black people calling whitey a honky motherfucker. And then, hey, you nigger this, you that. All this shit would go on. And then when it was over, everybody was like, okay, let's go back to work. So nothing was carried over. It was all dumped in the game. But people were taping this thing, the game, and they had a thing called the wire. And the wire were speakers all over the place. Wherever you went, the bathroom, the kitchen, bedroom, wherever you were, there was a speaker, and it was playing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, of people screaming, "You motherfucker," and all this crazy shit. And I was like, man, this is wild, man. What are they doing? And then they told me that if I was there for over 6 months, I would have to have a vasectomy. All men had to have vasectomies if you were there for over 6 months.
You got to get your nuts cut to stay?
Yeah.
Good Lord.
They were forcing women to have abortions.
And men have vasectomies.
And then when I went, when I talked to my friend Skippy, the Synanon rules were, number 1, no violence, number 2, no drugs. When I was there, the violence thing was out the window. They had a group of people called the Imperial Marines, and the Imperial Marines carried guns. Synanon was the largest purchaser of firearms in the state of California for 3 years in the 1970s.
Jesus. So they were nonviolent except their people.
Well, they were...
So these Marines were them. That was they were...
Oh, yeah, they were members of Synanon.
Right. But were they members or were they staff?
They were members. They were
Okay.
a separate group.
Right. Within...
Synanon.
It sounds huge, like it's a huge organization. Like it was big, huh?
Well, they had multiple facilities. They had their own trucking company. They had their own gas stations. They had an airport.
Business. Full on. Airport?
Yeah.
Oh, they had their... yeah.
And airplanes and airplane mechanics.
Well, you collect everybody's fucking money and shit. It's a good place to start, especially for people who are like signing up for... I'm out of the universe, so to speak. I'm just going to come here to this commune or whatever. Here's my assets.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Same thing kind of that organized religion is.
Well, it had turned into
you're just
a religion.
tithing. You're just tithing, but you're tithing it all.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Give me everything.
Yes. Okay.
So he decided, what happened was they got busted, and the IRS came in and said, listen, you have all these assets, and you're not a nonprofit anymore. You're making money.
Right.
So he got pissed off, which I say this guy, Chuck Diederich, he was the main guy. He
Right.
started it. So he said, all right, I'll fix you. I'm going to turn it into a religion, and then you can't touch me. So everybody was forced to make it a religion, and there was all this... people.
Now, was it based on organized religion? Like
He was God.
Oh, okay.
He was the main guy, and him and his wife. It was a cult.
Yeah, right.
It was a cult.
Yeah, okay. For real.
Yeah, for real. But people didn't think of it as a cult. They thought they were, living.
Well, I don't think
they were living
they
an
thought Charlie
alternate...
Manson was either. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
or what was it? The Kool-Aid guy. Yeah. I can't think of his
Reverend.
name. Yeah. Same thing. You know what I'm saying?
Jim
Like,
Jones.
Yeah. He wasn't a cult, and from the inside he wasn't a cult, but from the outside everybody.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, he came from right in that same neighborhood.
Right.
He came from San Francisco.
Now, as soon as they started talking about cutting your nuts, is that when you bailed? Because they'd be like, "Hey, listen, you got a vasectomy." I'd be like, "Rich, where did Rich go?"
No, my daughter said yesterday. She said, "Well, it's a good thing you didn't stay,
Yeah, right?
or I wouldn't be here."
Yeah, none of your kids would have been, right? You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like
man.
this was before any of your kids were born. Wow.
Yeah. But what scared me the most, I think, was the violence. Whereas,
Now, when you say violence, like how is that playing out? Like, what were the Royal Marines? Or what? No, Royal Marines is what the British are. What do you call these guys again? The something Marines.
yeah, the Marines. But
What were they doing? Like, were they roughing people up, or going out and doing things out in town to other people, or like what was the violence that you're talking about?
okay, there was this mindset, I guess, happens in all cults, that there's somebody out to get us. And we need to protect ourselves because the bad people out there are coming to get us.
Until Waco.
Yes.
Until
Like,
Waco. Right? You know what I mean? Like, yeah, exactly. You know what I mean? Like, until they got to go in with the fucking tanks and helicopters and fucking burn your shit down.
And
Or move in Philadelphia where they got to,
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So the Marines were there to protect the citizens of Synanon from the outside entities that were attacking them.
Well, that's what you're told. But were they also rough on the? Were they keeping peace, or were they?
Here's
because you say violence. I think they're perpetrating violence on either out there or in on you or.
I didn't see any violence. I didn't see anybody get shot or beat up or anything like that. But I did see them say stuff like, we're going to get these people. We're going to. They were the ones that really got them. There was a lawyer, there was one lawyer in particular. That's the guy they put the rattlesnake in his mailbox. So that guy, they were after him, and they would talk about how they're going to get these people.
Right.
And then the other, there were farmers, because up in Marin County, I don't know if you've ever been in that part of California. There's all these hills and stuff, and a lot of farms.
Right.
And they had sort of a Quonset hut community up there, and kids were running away and running to the farmhouses, and the farmers were taking them in and reuniting with their families. And that pissed them off. And they said, we're going to kill any of these people that come in here and try to hurt us or take our kids and blah, 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 blah. So,
or actually try and block our kids from escaping.
Yeah.
Yes. So it became like a self-imposed, group-imposed prison, so to speak. You know what I mean? Like, we can't let these people
in here. They're going to do us harm. We got to, Jim Jones, right?
Right.
They're here to, when the congressman came down there, they're going to mess up.
Sociopathy is about blocking changes in narrative. Like, that's the danger, right? You know what I mean? Like, what is it? The religion, Scientology, right? You know what I mean? Like, the big thing of play about Scientology is you don't talk about Scientology and you don't associate with people outside of Scientology, and right, and and keeping everybody so closely knit like that, and trying to avoid any type of narrative, outside narrative that would counter what's being taught inside that organization. So it's still going on to this day, and I don't know whether that's violent or not violent, but I do know that it's I think it's based in the same area. I think it's Scientology specifically is Northern California that I'm aware of, and they're a giant real estate property holder from what I understand. Same reason people tithe large amounts of their of their resources, and and it's I don't know how violent specifically, but I do know that from what I've heard, I don't know, I only know what I've read and what I've heard from media, but a lot of those things still exist, which is trying to control people, shame them, control them, right? Legally beat the shit out of them. Like, that's another one. Like, you talked about the lawyer, you know what I mean? Like, now they lawyer up. Their legal capabilities, and they're well funded with deep, deep pockets, and they can afford to bury you if you step outside and, or, shame you in a way that, publicly ridicule you, or it's crazy. So how do you end up out of there? Like, what happens? Like, how do you end up? Yeah, I remember you telling me that, I remember one point where you said you had to call mom and get you to get a plane ticket. I think that was.
Yeah. You couldn't just walk out of the place, okay? You had to sit on the bench. And when you sat at the bench, you were not in Synanon or out of Synanon. You sat at the bench, and then you had all these people that would walk up to you and try to get you to come back in, and they'd talk this, they'd try to convince you to come back. When they bring your friends, that you were close to, try to go and pull you back in. So finally, I realized that that's what they were doing, and I just said to myself, I got to go. If I don't go and I go back in there, I don't know what's going to happen to me.
Right.
And I had, like I said, I had nothing. I just had the shirt on my back, my pants, no wallet, no ID, no nothing, man, nothing, not a penny in my pocket. And I said, fuck it, I'm going. And I walked out the door, walked up to...
Past the bench? Did you sit on the bench for a while?
I was on the bench for quite a while. Because I was afraid if I walked out, somebody would come after me and hurt me.
Right.
So
right.
I wanted to I was trying to do it
the Marines, right?
Whoever.
Or
who knows?
Yeah, right. You know
who
what I mean?
knows?
Like, clearly they had power.
Yeah.
And had stripped you voluntarily of all of your power. Because when you take away somebody's ability to leave financially, right? You take away their identification. So you basically strip somebody of anything other than their physical body, and then you put them in clothing that makes you obviously who the fuck you are when you leave.
Yeah.
Because you be out in town in your overalls and shit. You know what I mean? And I don't care who you are. Everybody in the Navy, you know what I mean? If somebody escaped basic training or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, even if you managed to get another set of clothes, you had, you wore, in the Navy, you wore this Dixie cup and the sun shine on you all day long. So you could be out in town, you'd see a guy and he'd have like a white circle around his head where you were getting burned in the sun all day long in San Diego while they PT'd you and marched you all over the place. You'd see a guy out in town and was like, that guy just he either escaped or, because he, you looked a certain kind of way.
Something's not right.
Yeah, something's not right. So you called Mom Collect and said,
well, I hitchhiked and I got to the airport. So I don't know if you remember, you're probably old enough to remember the Hare Krishna movement.
Hare, Hare, Hare.
So there was a group of Hare Krishna people in there, and they were bald too. And they saw me, and they befriended me. And they gave me a copy of their Bible. It was called the Bhagavad Gita. And they gave me a dime to call home. And I called my mother, and she did. I thought, oh, man, she's so fed up. She's just going to say,
But she was also one of us. So in some way.
Yeah, maybe.
You know what I mean? Like, I think today there's a stigma, but it's so wide ranging, the impact that the disease has, that some people see it and, have a kindness to it. Right. But I find that, and even in inner circles where we're at, there are some people that are us that aren't kind to us, right? Because it reminds them of them and they fucking hate us because we're them. It's kind of like, closeted homosexuality where people hate gays and want to beat them up. You know what I mean? Like, it's because they're, closeted gay and, you know what I mean? And that angers them in some way, but I think there's a portion of people who, probably, I can't speak proportionately about how many or how few, but, once you understand this, it kind of leverages kindness a little bit. You know what I mean? Your mom probably understood. Even if she only went to the meetings for 6 months or whatever, and then didn't, even if she had mental issues.
This was before that.
Oh, this was even before that,
this
right?
Was before that, yeah.
Do you think at that point she knew she was a addict or? Nah.
No.
Right.
But she was a mother, and she loved her kid.
Oh, man, you can do no wrong, my friend.
Yeah.
Even when you're doing wrong. You know what I mean? That's the last
Well, there was the guilt of her, I mean?
Yeah.
For being an addict herself and...
Right.
So, but
nature versus nurture, and how much of this was me. And,
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But she sent you a plane ticket?
Yep. Sent me a ticket, and I got back, and I was home. I think I was home for 4 or 5 hours. I slept, and got up, went back right into the city, and started shooting dope.
Good Lord.
And if that ain't sick.
Yeah.
That's sick.
So. Eventually, the gift of desperation, final gift of desperation arrives. You've been clean now for 45 years.
Yeah.
So your clean date is what?
May 15th, 1979.
Okay. And was there a rock bottom final point where it was like enough is enough is enough? Or you just had enough and just decided?
Two things I think happened. One was... towards the end, I had moved into my mother. I was 28 years old. I moved back in with her. And when I came back from Synanon and I was shooting dope, I realized that if I kept down that path, I was going to either go to jail or die.
Right.
So I decided to switch to alcohol.
Right.
And I was living with my mother and drinking like a fish, and I would... I'd fall asleep in a chair and my cigarette butts would start burn holes in the furniture and the carpet and stuff like that. So my mother got really frightened that I was going to burn the house down. Mm. And I guess my sister and other people got and said, listen, you got to get rid of them, And so she finally said, Rich, you got to go. So that's when I moved in with my to be wife.
Right.
So that was number one. My main enabler
Right.
was gone. I got fired from my job.
Right.
That was number two. And number three, I started being admitted on a regular basis to a nut house detox ward of a hospital.
Mm.
And I think I might have been there like about 3 or 4 times within several months. And eventually, the last time my wife drove me there, they threw me out. They said, "You come in here too often."
Mm.
So I went. I was kind of happy they threw me out because I went and I got a bottle of liquor and I was drinking it underneath a bridge in South Amboy, New Jersey. That's my last time I got high, and waiting for my wife to come get me. And the bottom was it the worst thing? I don't know. I don't know.
Just enough.
You know, I wanted to get high and I wanted to get clean.
Right.
So I had some little spark of desire to stop. And I had a huge amount, too, of wanting to continue on drinking and continue using. And I guess at some point, it just, the desire to stop was just a little bit more than the desire to continue.
Right.
And that spark was all I needed.
There you go. Hey, the gifts of desperation.
Gifts of desperation.
That's what this program's all about. That's what Dancing on the Volcano is all about. Right? You know, and the dancing is basically what we do afterwards. Right.
Yeah.
And one thing I learned from you is that the gifts of desperation keep coming.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Different levels.
Yeah.
It's no longer
because
drugs.
You'd been in AA for a long time, right?
23 years.
Before you and I met. And you had reached a point of being in a really bad place in your head before you reached, before we ever got the opportunity to meet.
Yeah.
And so, all right. So, trying to think about, there's 10 different ways we can go from here. All right. So you've been going to AA meetings, right? You've been doing that for a while, right? Sponsoring some guys, staying clean, right? Right. You and Lois decide to get married, have a family, right? Your oldest son is born, right? Right. You get into business for yourself. Mm-hmm. I know that, right? So was the first business the glass business?
Yeah.
Right. Now you work for a guy who had a glass business first, right? That's where you.
No.
How did you end up doing the glass business?
It was a hobby.
Okay.
And then when I left Alina Lodge, the suggestion was that I don't go back into social work for 2 years.
Right.
So I guess they figured, 2 years you'll find something else and move into a different direction.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So, and stained glass at that. I mean, was that first or was it? I mean, was there ever like blown glass or was it mostly?
No, it was always stained glass for me.
Stained glass.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And it opened up a little shop.
Mm-hmm. And that grew over time, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. It progressed, and I didn't know. I had no idea how to run a business. I didn't know anything. You know what I mean?
Right.
But I had my overhead so low that I was able to fumble through things and just as long as I just kept moving forward, I was okay.
So you, I remember at one point because you've observed my background and the things I've gone through, and I remember one time hearing you talk about buying the Porsche.
Yeah.
Right. You know what I mean? And it was like, and I, can kind of relate to, like here's this outward representation of, trying to fill a void, so to speak. You know what I mean? Like, look at this, you know what I mean? Like, what do you say? Money, property, and prestige. Right. You know what I mean? And
yeah, it was like, look at me. I'm not a bum.
Right.
Right. I am somebody. See that car? I am somebody.
Right. Right.
Well, we know that's...
Well, you are somebody. You're somebody to me, and you're somebody to a lot of other people. So that really isn't false. It's
Whether
just
I have a Porsche or not.
yes, right, exactly. And but going through that phase, right? You know what I mean? Like, I think one of the things that's compelling about what I've found is, people that I like to interview is, and I said this before in a previous interview, you know what I mean? Like the biggest, I think sometimes what I find sad, and everybody's life and their path is different, but people that don't live a full life from the gift that they're given, you know what I mean? Like, to me, it's almost like squandering it. And I've known people with many decades clean who borrowed $10 off me, and it wasn't because they were borrowing $10 off me because they were destitute. They were borrowing $10 off me because they just refused to do anything with their lives. And it just, to me, it was kind of like, like I peel off $10, like, here you go. You know what I mean? Like, I don't need it, whatever. But there was part of me that just felt like, what a fucking waste. You know what I mean? Like, build a beautiful life for yourself. You know what I mean? Your children, your grandson, you know what I mean? Like, that's badass, So we met, you transitioned from one fellowship to another. Mm-hmm. And in the interest of anonymity, we won't talk about which ones or whatever, but how did that happen?
The transition?
Yeah.
That was I have AIDS. I can talk about that. So having AIDS and being in AA was isolated. I couldn't talk about it. If there were other people in there that had AIDS, I didn't know.
Right. Right. So you had said before, I know we had talked about it, that, that was the hardest part about being there, was that, that we
needing help and not being able to ask for it.
Yes.
Yeah,
you know
that
what
was
I mean?
brutal,
And you had
man.
been there a long, long time before you finally made a decision to go to a place where, where you could speak more freely about.
Well, I talked to my sponsor,
Right.
and that's kind of a pivotal point too in my life. I got so desperate because I thought I was going to die.
Right.
And
well, they didn't even really know. You know what I mean? Like, you figure out, when did you find out you were HIV positive? Did they even?
78.
Right. They didn't even know what the fuck this shit was then, did they?
They didn't know much, and the only thing they thought that if after 8 years of exposure, you would start to develop symptoms, and that once you started to develop symptoms, within 6 months to 18 months, you'd be dead. There was nothing they could do for you, but I had a doctor tell me, listen, there's nothing I can do for you, but I will make you comfortable.
Jesus.
So that's
now, what do? You go home and tell Lois?
I went home and told Lois. Yeah.
Did she lose her shit?
Sure. That was terrible, terrible, terrible thing.
You already had children at that point, right?
Yeah.
Did you have all three at that point, or how old is your daughter?
Yeah. My daughter's 36.
Right.
So, had to...
Do you automatically go, oh, shit, what about my kids? Do they have it too? Right.
Yeah, and my wife, my kids, everybody's going to die.
Right.
And not only that, at the same time, you had, what's his name? Paul Michael Glasser.
Right.
Starsky and Hutch guy.
Yeah.
His wife died of AIDS. His daughter died of AIDS. He watched all his whole family die. And I'm thinking to myself, fuck, I mean, it's one thing for me to die, but do I have to watch my children die? My wife?
And the guilt comes swimming back, like the same kind of guilt, maybe even worse than what you had when you were in the, in the clinic using, you know what I mean, as a counselor, you know what I mean? You got to be like, oh my God, I sentenced my whole family to fucking death.
Yeah.
Right? And then you got to go to a meeting, and then you can't share where you're at. You know what I mean? Fucking torture.
Yeah,
torture.
It was fucked up. It was really fucked up. My wife, you talk about...
She's badass, by the way. I fucking love her.
Oh.
She's just dynamite people.
The time... Because, now you can get a kit. I think you can take a test, and you'll know if you're HIV positive right away.
Right.
Back then, it took, 60 days maybe. You took a blood test. They sent it away.
Were you symptomatic in any way, or like you just happened to pop up on a blood test? And were they even really testing it in fucking 79?
Well, I took an exam for an insurance policy. And it came back that I had the HIV.
Telling you, they were looking. Leave it to the insurance companies, baby.
Yeah.
Fuck.
Maybe that's a good way just to end it. I gotta go home.
I love you very much.
Thanks, Jimmy.
You know?
We make friends and we have relationships in this place that are beyond what other people do. You know what I mean?
No
man?
doubt. Mm-hmm. Fucking love you.
You got a good pop there.
Rich and I chose to stop filming after this. Dancing on a volcano can be and often is an emotional experience for participants. We didn't need more. We were exhausted, emotionally hungover. The experience was cathartic, and capturing his story was important. Rich's journey of recovery has been a powerful example for me and so many others, but we do have a responsibility to keep some things to ourselves so as not to harm others. Rich's humility and willingness to share painful things is a trait I attempt to emulate in my life. To be alive, to have a beautiful family, to retire successfully from business, to persevere in adversity, to live with dignity and grace. This is to dance. Back from the brink to a true vision of hope for all of us. The power of vulnerability. Thank you, Rich. Love you, brother.